All right, well, Happy New Year. Let's turn our Bibles to Luke chapter 8. And starting in the 40th verse, where we walk into a story of two people. We're getting ready to see two people, two very different stories unfold. And these are two stories about people who are going to be noticed by God. They're going to be noticed by God this day. And I want to ask you guys, and this is the key question of the night, what does it take exactly? What does it take to get noticed by God? You know, for a lot of people, that very question is one that just intimidates them. They don't want to be noticed by God. Many people, they come into life, and for whatever reason, they don't want that light by God shined on them. Maybe it's because they're intimidated. It's exposing your life. It's kind of like the IRS getting all up in your business, that you have your life unpacked and unfolded before God. For others, maybe it's that they realize that they're in a certain position in life and they don't really need God, so there's really no great reason to be noticed by God. And then for others, they might just be hidden. They might be the people who don't want to have anything to do with being noticed by God. So, I ask you, have you been noticed by God yet? Let's start in verse 40 and look at the story of one man, Jairus. He's a guy who got noticed by God that day. Starting in Luke 8, verse 40. It says, "Now when Jesus returned, the crowd welcomed him, for they were all waiting for him. And there came a man named Jairus, who was the ruler of the synagogue, and falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter about 12 years of age, and she was dying." Jairus, unlike the next character in this story, he is a noticeable character. This is a guy that was a ruler of the synagogue. He's a person that everybody knew. In the crowd, he would have been a noticeable figure. I think back to my childhood. I grew up around the Detroit area, and I think about the Pistons, the original bad boys. You think about, Bill Laimbeer, Rick Mahorn, and then who's this one guy that everybody noticed? Isaiah Thomas, you said? Rodman, Dennis Rodman, the Worm, right? This guy is the leading rebounder, defensive player, but this guy could get noticed. Before it was cool to have tattoos all over your body, this guy was sporting the tats all over. He had the different hair, the different colored dye every single night. He had piercings. I think because of him, everybody started getting piercings all over the place. This guy got noticed, and he did great in the NBA. He did really well. But then even after his career, he joined this wrestling federation, the New World Order. He was out there wrestling with these guys. And then even as recently as 2013, this guy, he's getting caught, befriending Kim Jong-un, the South Korean supreme leader. So the North Korea's supreme leader. So he's this noticeable character. His whole romance life. He had romance with Carmen Electra and this really secretive one with Madonna that got very exposed, and he's a noticeable figure. That's Jairus. Jairus is the guy that everybody knew. He's the person in the crowd. So when he comes up to Jesus in this story and he falls down at Jesus' feet, he's a very noticeable character. Unlike Jairus is the next character. She's somebody who was completely outcast. She's somebody who you would never pick out in a crowd, and you would stay completely away from her. Jairus, though, he had a problem. Even though he was this ruler of the synagogue and he had all these things going for him, he could do anything that he wanted. He had one big problem, and that's that his 12-year-old daughter had grown deathly ill, was going to be dead within a couple of hours or several minutes. And he finds himself in this position, unlike any other that he's ever had in his entire life, where he's got to realize that he's got nothing there. There is nothing there in his life that can take care of his daughter's situation right now. So here you have this ruler, this noticeable, this Dennis Rodman guy falling at the feet of Jesus Christ, begging him, "Jesus, please come with me, with my daughter." He must have heard about Jesus. He heard about Jesus casting out demons and healing the sick and cleansing lepers, and even raised a guy from the dead. This word of Jesus had been spreading around, and all these crowds were starting to surround him. Yet Jairus, he has the boldness and also the weakness, that surrendering spirit to fall down to Christ and gets noticed by Christ and starts to guide Jesus to his daughter who's dying. And the story could have kept going. The story could have kept going, and Jesus could have followed Jairus and just barely, if you're reading the story, you're thinking he's just going to save her life. But he doesn't do that. Jesus actually stops, and he does something totally different, picking up in verse 42. As Jesus went, the people pressed around him, and there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years. And though she had spent all of her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw she was not hidden, she came trembling, and falling down before him, declared in the presence of all people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." These are two very different people. Jairus, very noticeable, Dennis Rodman type, and this woman, she's an outcast. God had set in accordance a set of laws to guide his people, his Jewish people, to be completely set apart from all of the rest. He wanted the Jews to live by a righteous code, a righteous law that would be like any other. And for whatever reason, God put into law a very specific rule against people that had a problem with hemorrhaging blood. And you can see it, and we're going to turn to it real quick, in Leviticus chapter 15. And in verse 25, it says, and this is God's law, it says, "If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not at the time of her menstrual impurity, or if she has a discharge beyond the time of her impurity, all the days of the discharge she shall continue in uncleanness. As in the days of her impurity, she shall be unclean." So here you have this woman who is she's judged to be unclean, not even so bad as she herself. Anybody that she would come around would also be unclean. It says in here in the law that if she were to go to somebody, that person needs to go away and be on their own until they've spent a certain amount of time noticing that they are clean, they can go back into society. She was an outcast lady. She was desperate. She was absolutely desperate that day. She was so desperate that she would risk her life. She would risk her what little reputation that she had, what little dignity that she had, and she would walk up to Jesus Christ. She was desperate. 3 months ago, my wife and I began a journey that all I can say is that our life probably looks pretty stinking crazy right now, but it's what we're trying to do right now to follow God. And an opportunity came for me to look at my job. I had been working as an executive in a major healthcare organization in Cleveland, Ohio. And I had a chance, after several circumstances that were happening in my work and in my life and in my prayers to God, to leave my job. And then, as we were thinking about what to do next, because we're going to go into a season of transition in our lives, I had all these great ideas. I was telling my wife, let's just buy an RV. Let's go tour around the country. Let's see this thing. And we even went so far as to test drive one. And I think out of God's grace as an answer to my wife's prayers, instead he put a consulting job in my lap, a short-term consulting job in Kalamazoo, Michigan. So we found ourselves moving out of Cleveland, Ohio, and into Kalamazoo, Michigan. And the consulting opportunity started on a certain day. So we had like 2 weeks. And we thought, gosh, maybe God would use this chance that we have in our life, this little shot, this little window in time, to put our house in the market and try to sell it and try to be very, very flexible to wherever God will lead us to go. And we still don't exactly know what that plan is to this very moment. But as we put our house in the market, we had to get it ready for about 2 weeks. And getting a house ready for 2 weeks, if God were to have pulled me aside and said, okay, here's the plan. You're going to quit your job. You're going to sell your house, and I'm going to put a couple of barricades in the way. I'm going to put these things called kids. And one of them's 7, one of them's 5, one of them's 4, one of them's 2. And for every one thing you do right to clean your house or throw away some stuff or make it better, they're going to do like 2 or 3 things wrong, or they're going to mess that thing back up. But I'm going to test your powers to forgive. I'm going to test your abilities to have grace to your children, and you're going to make it through. And that's just barely what we did. In fact, we needed to leave the house at like 2 p.m. so that we could get to, on one day, so that we could get to Kalamazoo by 6, so we could get there just in time to check into our new apartment and get in there for the weekend. And the apartment landlords made no qualms about it. They said, hey, if you're a minute late, it's too late, we're going to shut the thing. So we are literally trying to unpack, clean, and like purge our house all at the same time, putting things in the basement or putting things in the garage that aren't going with us, and then packing enough for us to live for like 4 months. So imagine this, imagine that you're literally trying to pack your house in your car, okay? So here I am, I've got it all figured out. I'm trying to like totally Tetris this thing. I've got like the back van open of my wife's car. I've got the Explorer open. I'm just like putting bins in there. I'm like putting up toddler beds, strapping them to the roof of each of the vehicles. We've got clothes, and as we're walking out, it's like 1:30. We gotta get out of there by 2. We're stepping out, we're cleaning, and we realize like our 2-year-old daughter doesn't even have pants on. We're like, just forget it. Just throw her in there. We put her in. And we're like grabbing a load of laundry out of the dryer and like carrying it out and like putting it right next to me in the front seat. We've also got a dog, a golden retriever. We need to shove her in there. And we got to get a cat with like the kitty litter bin and the top somehow wedged in there with our 4 young kids. And then not to mention a bird. So that was my shotgun partner. I had the bird hanging out with me in the bird cage. So we start pulling out, hit down in the garage door, and we are leaving our house in Ohio, not knowing if it's going to sell, and we're just getting to Kalamazoo. And we're about a half an hour late, but no problem. You know what? We're going to pick this time up. The painter, he's like this like chain-smoking, coffee-drinking, sarcastic painter, and he's like literally like slapping on paint as we're walking out. And he made this one comment like in jest. He said, man, I really hope you guys don't get a flat tire, because he's like, you guys will never find that flat. You'll never get to your tire. I hope that doesn't happen. So we're like laughing about it and stuff. And we start driving away. We've got a half an hour to make up. I'm in front of my wife, probably a quarter mile in front. And I didn't see what happened next. My wife had to tell me because I was in front, and I had to like get off the toll road and come back. So what my wife could tell you is what it feels like, exactly what it feels like when you're driving about 65 miles down the road, 65 miles an hour down the road, and then all of a sudden your wheel falls off, because that's what happened with her. You know, she's driving the minivan, and the front right wheel decides to fall off, and she starts to shake. The wheel is shaking, and it's grinding, and she's just trying to barely maneuver out. She's trying to get over to the right lane. Thank God there was like the right lane was available. She was able to get over, and then the car came to an abrupt stop with her sticking out in the right lane. She looks up in the rearview mirror and sees that there's a trucker that decides that they're going to pull off of their route and just come right behind her and completely block the right lane to make it so that my wife and the kids are safe. The trucker, I'm sure, saw the toddler bed up top, saw the stickers in the windows, knew that this vehicle was full of kids, and she interceded for us. She decided to come off her route, intercede for us, and block the traffic. And my wife looked up in the rearview mirror and saw the trucker lady, and the trucker lady mouthed the words to her, "It's going to be all right." And so, not too long after that, my wife tells me that the state trooper comes up, and they have this meeting at the front quarter panel of the car. My wife gets out of the car, state trooper's walking up, they both walk up to the front quarter panel. My wife knows, like, she didn't see the tire fly off, but she knows that this is like way more than a flat tire. Like, the car is tipped over and things like this. And the state trooper is just walking up to the side of the car with my wife, looking at it, surprised look, and says, "Ma'am, it's not flat. There's nothing there. There's nothing there." You guys ever hit a point in your life where you realize that there's nothing there? Where you realize that there is nothing that you can possibly do to change that situation? That's what this woman was dealing with the discharged blood. She reached a point where she had spent all of her money on physicians. It says in Mark's gospel, Luke is a little bit more kind because Luke's a physician, so he gives these doctors a little bit of extra grace. But in Mark's gospel, it said that she spent all of her money on physicians, and the matter just got worse. She's going to the doctors, and her condition's getting worse. She's outcast of society. If she had a husband, she would have had to have been separated, divorced from her husband and her family. The people that she's hanging out with are lepers and other people that are sick. There's nothing there. I got up to that car and checked in with the state trooper and checked in with my wife, and the next thing my wife tells me that the state trooper said to her right after there's nothing there, he said, "Man, you're going to have to get in my cop car. I'll get you out of here." And she said, "Sir, I've got 4 kids, a dog, and a cat in that car back there." And if the guy's face wasn't dumbfounded enough after looking at what used to be a tire, realizing there was no studs, there was no tire, there was nothing, he's got to figure out how to slam 4 rugrats, a dog and a cat in this thing. So I walk up and I somehow start to like re-Tetris everything, bring things out of this car to get it into this car. I'm doing like the fireman carry of my golden retriever on the side of the highway on the shoulder to get her from one car to the next and bring the cat over, rechanging the kitty litter. And I just hit this point of desperation, realizing there's nothing I'm going to do to get this out of this unless I get some help here. And thankfully we had that trucker lady who interceded for us, that cop that graciously took our 4 young kids, breathing on the windows, writing their names, asking him every single question. I mean, this guy had no idea what he was getting himself into. He helped us out and got us to safety, got us to shelter. I realized, though, that there's nothing there. Nothing there. Gosh, I can only imagine what it must have been like for that woman. You know, in verse 44 of chapter 8 in Luke, you know, we get this picture of what it must have been like. What did she do? I mean, she had heard all these accounts of Jesus Christ, this guy who walked around and healed person for 12 years. She had to deal with this. She had to deal with what it was like to be discharging, hemorrhaging blood. I'm sure she faced anemia. She was faint. She was weak. And what does she do? In verse 44, it says, she came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. I'm sure it looked something like this. She does not want to get noticed. She might have even I'm picturing that she probably put a head covering on, and she's walking through, sneaking up behind Jesus of Nazareth in just the most shy way possible, just trying to reach the fringe of his garment. And all of a sudden, she's healed. All of a sudden, the power, the virtue of Jesus Christ, the Spirit of Jesus Christ supernaturally comes in this lady and heals her. 12 years. Unlike Jairus, his 12-year-old daughter, she had 12 years of health, and then all of a sudden, she hit this point of rock bottom, going to die. This lady had just spent the last 12 years in misery, in absolute misery. She walked up behind him. It was very difficult. It says, just earlier in the 8th chapter of Luke, it says that Jesus' own mother and brothers tried to reach him. They tried to reach him in a crowd, and they couldn't even get to him. Yet you have this weak, feeble old lady who does just that. And unlike everybody else who was standing around Jesus that day, she voluntarily touched him. There's a lot of people who were pressing in on Jesus. They weren't reaching out. They weren't reaching out in desperation. They were just there. And she voluntarily reached out to Jesus, reached out to him. She took that initiative in her desperation. You guys ever reached out to Jesus? You ever had that point? And the only thing that's similar about these 2 characters, Jairus and this hemorrhaging lady, is that they were both desperate. And they both recognized that they couldn't muster up enough in their own checking account. They couldn't do it enough with their own home remedies to fix the problem. And they needed to reach out to Jesus Christ for their help. They knew where to go. I love the story of Peter in here that's kind of interwoven in. It's a little subtle. You know, Peter, quite a personality this guy had. You know, he's always questioning. He's just got this very curious, questioning personality. In verse 45, it says, Peter says, and Jesus said, you know, who was it that touched me? And when all denied it, Peter said, Master, the crowds surround you and are pressing in on you. It's kind of like me with Peter was probably a little bit like I am when my 4-year-old son would like be walking in a rainstorm and there'd be like the first drop of water would hit him, and he'd say, "Hey, who put that drop of water on me?" And like, yeah, it's torrential downpour. I mean, Peter's trying to correct Jesus. He's trying to say, you're not going to figure out who touched you. Everybody's touching you. Are you crazy? Just like my son, you're not going to figure out which raindrop. Every raindrop is touching you. And Peter's probably like half irritated, giving unsolicited counsel to Jesus. So what did Jesus do? He didn't stop there, though. He didn't stop. He noticed that something happened. It says in the first part of verse 46, but Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." The character of Jesus right now, I'm not picturing him being mad or anything like that. He is recognizing very clearly, and in Mark's gospel, it says that he was looking for the woman that touched him. So he knew who touched him. There was no doubt that Jesus Christ knew who it was. And it was probably something like you've got this woman creeping up, touching the fringe of Jesus, and she's finding herself healed. And then he says, "Hey, who touched me?" She's looking around. Peter's given his counsel, and he said, "Hey, who touched me?" Probably, I'm picturing Jesus could have been maybe even looking right at her. And she's probably like, uh-oh. Because she had this opportunity now. She had spent 12 years in misery. She spent 12 years with all of the attention that she could place was probably upon herself. She was doing all these things that she could on her own, realizing there's nothing there. There's nothing there. There's nothing more I can do. Now I'm healed, but instead of leaving it right there, Jesus is going to now call me out in front of the crowds. He's going to call me out. And for Jesus, he wasn't doing this in a condemning way. He wasn't doing this in a way that made her feel bad. He wanted to make the person who had just received the grace of God be now the purveyor of the grace of God. He wanted to have the person who is healed be the one that testifies to her healing. The woman responded by realizing that she was not hidden anymore. She trembled and fell down. It was very hard for her. She could not do this on her own. She was not just bold and proclaiming the gospel and letting everybody know. She was trembling. Very hard for her. Probably terrified. In verse 47, it says, when the women saw that she was not hidden, so here's this woman who went from being hidden her whole life, an outcast of society, nobody paying attention to her, realizes that she's not hidden anymore. She comes trembling, falling down before him, declared in the presence of all people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And there's other people that fell before Jesus Christ. Peter fell before Jesus Christ when he realized that the powers that Jesus had to catch all these fish and then called Peter out. He fell down before him. So did the leper earlier in this chapter, fell down before Jesus Christ. So did Jairus, fell down. And this woman, with all the power that she had, she fell down and testified to the person of Jesus Christ. Guys, when we reach that point of desperation, when we know that there's nothing more that we have, nothing more that we can do on our own, we realize that life's problems are just way too big for us to go after on our own. Jesus is watching us. He wants to help us during those times. He's the solution. See, he uses times like this, times in desperation, to bring people to himself. Jairus would have had no reason to fall down at the feet of Jesus Christ if he didn't reach a desperate situation with his daughter. And neither would this woman. He allowed this woman to endure this test, this terrible agony that she had for 12 years, to have this great opportunity to meet Jesus Christ face to face and reach out to him. The best news of all is that Jesus Christ is here right now. He's available for us. The risen God is available for us right now to reach out to and get that need that we have when we are desperate. It could be a time that you are facing right now where you're on financial hardship, and when you make the numbers add up in the checking account, when you look at what's about to come in, there's no way you're going to make it. It might be that sickness, somebody that's deathly ill, somebody who's ready to die, and at that time you realize that you don't have it. All this power that you might have had in the business world is not enough. You need something more than that. It might be an awful breakup. It might be a relationship problem, maybe a spouse. And there's nothing that's going to change that guy unless God interrupts the scene. He's there for us, waiting for us. And the best news of all is that when we reach out to Jesus Christ, we become a child of God. In verse 48, and he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. That word daughter, it's an endearing word. It's the only time that Jesus refers to anybody in all of Scriptures in this way. Before Jesus came on the scene, people didn't have this feeling of a close relationship with God. When Jesus arrives, the way that he talks to the Father in heaven is a personal relationship, and he now offers that to her. You get to be a daughter and made well, and when he makes you well, he does more than just the physical. For this woman who was an outcast of society, he fixed her physically. He fixed her emotionally. She had a chance to testify before all the people who had considered her trash on the outside, and he fixed her spiritually. She could rest assured that she had a seat in the kingdom of heaven forever and ever. And I ask you, have you been noticed by Jesus yet? That's awesome, Max. I want to offer for you guys, it doesn't take much. You don't have to be like Jairus. You don't have to be a ruler of a synagogue. God doesn't care about all the bad stuff you might have done. God doesn't even care if maybe in your life you've put him a little lower than you should have. He wants to offer free grace to you today. And I'm going to give you that opportunity through a prayer. If any of you are feeling like for the first time in your life, this might be the very time that you want to surrender to the Lord Jesus Christ as your defender, as the one who went before you and suffered and died. I'm going to ask everybody in this room, please, to close your eyes and bow your heads. Father, I thank you so much, Lord, for being a God that notices us when we are desperate. Lord, when we realize that we are not big enough on our own and we need somebody else, you stand there in the gap for us, Lord. You are our intercessor. You are the one who came to save us all. Lord, maybe somebody here today has found that they are at a point of desperation, or maybe they've reached a point of desperation at some time in their past, and they're ready today to surrender. They're ready today to recognize that there is no way that they are going to fix their situation on their own. I ask that person be bold and courageous, just like the woman was. How she reached out to Jesus, how she went through the crowd, she weaved her way through and reached the hand out to Jesus. I don't have any special powers here, but God does. And he's watching us right now. If you want to be noticed by God, I ask you just to raise your hand. Accept Jesus Christ as your Savior today. Acknowledge that he is your Lord and he is your provider and your defender. Maybe you've realized there's no way that you're going to make it through next week's mortgage, or that sickness that's infecting your family, there's no cure for it. Now's a great time to realize when you've hit the end of your rope that there is life eternal and Jesus Christ can offer it. If there's anybody in here today, and wants to put their faith and hope in Jesus Christ, it's available for you. It's always available. God, I pray. Yes, sir. Yes. Anybody else? We have one person that came forward. God speak to you today, not through my words, through these scriptures where you realized that you're at a point of desperation and you need something more than what life has to offer. Anybody out there? Yes. Thank you. God's watching you. He wants to rescue your life. Yes. Lord, I thank you for these people that came forward today. These people who decided to put their faith and their hope and trust in the only one true God, the one who was raised from the dead, who defeated the grave and will live forever. Be with them, Lord. Be with us today as we go boldly and we testify to who you are. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.